I never imagined betrayal would come from my own brother. Until he took the stand at my custody hearing and called me reckless. Your Honor, she's never been responsible. His words cut deeper than any blade. I sat frozen in my gray suit, clutching the pen in my hand as if it could hold my world together. I'm Clara Miller, 38 years old. And most mornings in my small apartment begin the same way. The place isn't much, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, creaky floors that complain under your feet, but when the sun spills through the blinds, it feels warmer than any mansion ever could. That light pours into our kitchen now, glinting off the chipped edges of the counter while I stir a pan of scrambled eggs. Behind me at the table sits my 10-year-old son, Ethan, his pencil tapping nervously as he battles a math worksheet. Mom, he calls, frustration bubbling in his voice. Why do they make these problems so tricky? I glance over my shoulder. His brow is furrowed, his tongue poking out slightly the way it does when he's concentrating hard. I wipe my hands on a towel, walk over, and bend beside him. They just want to see how well you can think things through, I say softly. Try breaking it down. Smaller steps always help. Today's to inright crease to the passin. It is not ready with a braid for hate. Enizelt, entelbeed, with acted and mated for shaded. He looks at me, his hazel eyes searching. Is that what you do at work? Break problems down? For a second I freeze. He doesn't know the truth, not yet. To him, I'm just a woman who spends her days in courtrooms. Someone who helps people with legal messes. That's the story I've fed him. And it's easier than explaining the full weight of what I really do. I smooth a hand over his hair and force a smile. Something like that. Sweetheart, I help people when things get complicated. Every well. It's not of the fard. He accepts the answer without pressing further. Turning back to his paper, I breathe out slowly. Relieved. Though inside there's that familiar pinch of guilt. Protecting him from my world feels necessary. But it also feels like a lie that grows heavier with each passing year. The timer on the oven dings. I set a plate of toast and eggs on the table. Then notice Ethan struggling with an apple. His small hands are clumsy around the paring knife. Slices coming out jagged. Here, I murmur, taking it gently from him. With a few practiced motions, I carve neat wedges and place them back in his bowl. His smile brightens the room more than the morning sun ever could. Moments like this remind me of why I fight so hard. He is my anchor, my reason, the single piece of my life that can't be bargained away. And, though I sit there across from him, sharing a simple breakfast, a flicker of unease lingers beneath the warmth. Some shadows don't need a knock at the door, they just wait patiently, ready to crash into the world you've built when you least expect it. The courthouse always feels colder than it should. The polished stone floors echo every step, and the fluorescent lights buzz faintly overhead, as if reminding you that this is a place where warmth doesn't belong. I walk down the long hallway toward the courtroom, my folder pressed against my chest. When I saw him leaning casually against the wall, Daniel, my ex-husband, he spotted me immediately, and that smug grin spread across his face. The one I used to mistake for charm before I learned it was arrogance. Clara, he said, his voice dripping with false familiarity. Still playing the role of the hard-working little clerk? Must be exhausting. Pretending you can provide for Ethan on scraps. Gadding with your... I stopped, tightening my grip on the folder until my knuckles went white. I wanted to say something sharp, to cut him down with the truth. But I didn't. Instead, I let silence fill the space between us. Silence. And the sound of my heart pounding. Daniel chuckled, taking my silence as weakness. You know, one day, Ethan will see you for what you really are. A woman barely holding it together, clinging to a job that isn't worth half the effort you put in. His eyes narrowed. A flicker of triumph there. He deserves better. And if you ten his... I turned my face away before he could see the fury burning in my eyes. My whole body was stiff, my pulse loud in my ears. Still, I walked past him without a word. forcing my steps to stay steady. It was the only power I had in that moment to refuse to give him the satisfaction of watching me break. Inside the courtroom, the air was heavy. The judge presided with his usual stern calm. Lawyers shuffled papers, and the gallery whispered with anticipation. I tried to focus on breathing, on the thought of Ethan, safe in school and blissfully unaware of the storm brewing here. Then the bailiff announced the next witness. My mother, Helen Miller. My mother, who raised me in discipline so strict it felt like steel bars. She walked to the stand slowly, her hands trembling just enough to be noticeable. For a fleeting second, I hoped she might surprise me, might defend me with the fierce loyalty that mothers are supposed to have. But when her eyes met mine, she looked away. My stomach dropped. I already knew. The questioning began, and with each answer my chest tightened. She spoke of me as unstable, claimed my income was uncertain, that my lifestyle was unsafe for a child. The words came haltingly at first, but then steadier, like she had rehearsed them. I recognized Daniel's phrases in her mouth, the poison he must have whispered into her ear. I sat frozen, unable to move, as if every word was a knife sinking into me. My own mother, dismantling me piece by piece in front of strangers. I felt the heat rise in my face, not from anger, not even from shame, but from something deeper, an ache so profound it left me hollow. I stumbled into the restroom of the courthouse, my legs heavy, as though they didn't belong to me. The doors shut behind me, and the quiet was jarring compared to the chaos of the courtroom. For a moment I just stood there, clutching the edge of the sink, trying to remember how to breathe. When I finally lifted my eyes, the woman staring back at me in the mirror looked like a stranger. Her makeup smudged, cheeks streaked with tears, posture bent, as if life had finally succeeded in breaking her down. That woman was me. The betrayal cut deeper than any cross-examination, deeper than Daniel's insults. My mother, my own flesh and blood. She had looked at me with eyes that once promised protection and love, and then delivered words that painted me as unfit to raise my own son. I thought about Ethan's smile that very morning, his little voice asking about my job, his trust in me. He had no idea that his grandmother had just placed a knife squarely in my back. The sobs came fast and hot. I pressed a hand over my mouth to muffle them. But there was no hiding from myself. The mirror refused to let me turn away. I saw the trembling shoulders, the cracked shell of a woman who, for just a few minutes, allowed herself to collapse. But then something shifted. My chest burned from the lack of air, and I drew in a shaky breath. Another, and another, slowly, deliberately. I forced my body to still. My reflection changed with every inhale. The same face, but harder now. Stripped of illusion, there was grief. Yes, but beneath it, something stronger clawed its way to the surface. Resolve. I leaned closer to the mirror, whispering to the broken version of myself. This isn't where you stop. This isn't where you let them win. The tears still clung to my lashes, but the softness drained from my eyes. In its place was a glint I hadn't felt in years. The glint that reminded me of the battles I'd fought quietly, the discipline I had carried in secret. I wasn't just a fragile mother in the courtroom. I was more. I had always been more. My hand steadied as I dug into my bag. Somewhere beneath the folders and pens was the lifeline I needed. My phone. Its smooth surface felt like the only weapon within reach. I unlocked it with practiced ease, my thumb hovering over a number I had dialed countless times in my head, but rarely in reality. The thought of what came next made my pulse quicken. But not with fear, this was anticipation. The spark of strategy forming out of despair. I pressed the name. The dial tone rang, echoing in the hollow space of that restroom. And with each ring, my backbone straightened. When the voice answered on the other end, calm and steady, I inhaled deeply and said, "It's time. I can't let this go on any longer." Whitney was, okay. The mirror caught me again. And this time I barely recognized the woman staring back. Not weak. Not broken. A fighter. Someone who had been wounded. Yes. But who now knew exactly what she had to do. Morgan Hayes's office smelled faintly of leather and old coffee. The kind of place where too many battles had been fought behind closed doors. I sat across from him, my hands clenched in my lap, as he leaned back in his chair with that seasoned look lawyers wear when they've seen more desperation than they care to remember. His eyes scanned me like I was another lost case waiting to happen. "Clara," he began, his tone calm but edged with doubt. "I have to be honest with you. Judges don't hand out custody based on who cries the hardest. If you don't have anything substantial real evidence, I can't fight shadows for you. It's not no fight." For a moment, the words stung. I knew how I must have looked to him, another mother claiming injustice. Another voice drowned by her own emotions. But I hadn't come here to beg. Not this time. Slowly, I reached into my bag and slid a thin folder across the desk. His brow arched slightly, but he didn't move until I nudged it closer. Finally, he opened it. Inside were printouts of old emails. Correspondence between Daniel and me when we were still married. The kind that didn't just reveal our finances but showed Daniel's full awareness of my income, my savings, my stability. And beneath those, carefully stapled together, were the bank statements, numbers that told a story more honest than any courtroom testimony. Morgan's lips pressed into a thin line as he flipped through page after page. His casual detachment began to falter. He leaned forward, rereading one particular email where Daniel explicitly acknowledged the exact amount of money I was earning at the time. He tapped the page with his pen. "This," he muttered, half to himself, "changes things. It's not to do." I felt my spine straighten. For weeks, maybe months, I had lived under the shadow of Daniel's narrative. The one where I was the fragile, underpaid, incapable mother, now, in the steady hands of my lawyer. The truth was no longer just mine to hold. "Morgan," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. He stood in that courtroom and pretended I couldn't provide for Ethan. He let my own mother believe I was hanging by a thread. But he's known the truth all along. He lied under oath. And so, in it was make out. Morgan looked up at me, his skepticism replaced by the sharp glimmer of strategy. "If we can prove that," he said, his credibility collapses. "Judges don't take kindly to perjury. This could be the leverage we need." Think smart watching. For the first time since stepping foot in that courthouse, I felt the tide shift. The despair that had followed me into the restroom was giving way to something else. Confidence. Not the reckless kind, but the quiet, calculated kind that comes when you know the ground beneath you is finally solid. Morgan closed the folder carefully, as if it were more valuable than gold. "We'll build around this, but Clara, you have to stay composed. The more he unravels, the calmer you must remain. Do you understand?" I nodded, meeting his eyes without hesitation. "I do. And as enemies to his court it mattered." Walking out of that office, I didn't feel like the same woman who had wept into a courthouse mirror hours earlier. My steps were measured, my shoulders squared. For once, I wasn't reacting to Daniel's game, I was preparing my own. The cafe was nearly empty when I walked in. The smell of roasted beans lingered in the air, mingling with the faint sound of jazz spilling from a speaker tucked in the corner. I spotted her right away. My mother sat near the window, hands folded tightly around a porcelain cup, her posture rigid, her eyes avoiding mine even before I slid into the chair across from her. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The silence felt heavier than the air, pressing down on me until I finally asked the question that had been clawing at my chest since the trial. "Why? Mom, why would you believe Daniel over me?" Her lips parted, but her eyes stayed fixed on the coffee swirling in her cup. "Clara, he seems so composed. He has answers. He makes sense. And you've been so emotional." Out of the station, It was like listening to Daniel's voice dressed up in hers. Every word sounded borrowed, rehearsed, as if she had memorized his script and repeated it until she couldn't tell where his thoughts ended and hers began. My throat tightened. A wave of anger threatened to rise. But I held it down. I wasn't here to scream. I wasn't here to make a scene. I wanted her to see me. Not the shadow of his lies. Emotional? I whispered, shaking my head slowly. Of course I'm emotional. Mom, this is my son, my life, and instead of standing with me, you stand with the man who betrayed us both. Ah, thanks for watching. Her eyes flicked up for a moment, soft but uncertain, before darting away again. She reached for her napkin, folding it over and over with nervous fingers. Clara, I just think Daniel provides stability. He's stability? My voice broke. But not with anger, with sorrow. You think his money makes him stable? You think his lies make him safer for Ethan than me? The tears came then. Quiet and steady. They weren't the tears of defeat I had shed in that courthouse restroom. These were different sorrow that carved itself into my bones. The sorrow of realizing my own mother couldn't see me for who I was. I pressed my palm flat against the table, steadying myself. My voice came low. Firm. Carrying every ounce of the strength I had been gathering. If you can't protect me, Mom, then please, don't destroy me. Any one mind, especially another of the firminate 10. Her hands froze mid-fold. The words hung between us like smoke. Impossible to sweep away. For a long time, she said nothing. The jazz track changed. The barista clattered cups behind the counter. A couple laughed faintly across the room. But between us, there was only silence, an awful, suffocating silence. She looked at me once more. Her eyes rimmed red, but her lips sealed tight. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She simply stood, gathered her coat, and walked out of the cafe. I stayed seated, staring at the chair she had just vacated. My coffee had gone cold, untouched. I wiped the tears from my cheeks and inhaled. Long and steady. This was a loss I hadn't wanted to face. But maybe it was the one I needed to. If my mother couldn't stand beside me, then I would stand alone. And for the first time, that thought didn't terrify me. That night, after I tucked Ethan into bed, I lingered at his doorway longer than usual. His small chest rose and fell with the deep rhythm of childhood sleep. His hand curled around the corner of his blanket as though it were a shield. The innocence on his face nearly undid me. I pulled the door until only a sliver of light from the hall slipped through, then walked quietly back to my room. I sat on the edge of my bed, the silence pressing down heavy and unbroken. My eyes drifted to the glow of the nightlight spilling across the hallway. It carried me backward, decades into my own childhood bedroom. I remembered lying awake at night, hearing my mother's footsteps echo in the hallway. Every decision of my life had been hers to make. What I wore, what I ate, who I befriended. Even what I dreamed of becoming, it had all been filtered through her expectations. If I resisted, her disappointment was sharp enough to cut. She would say she knew best, that she was protecting me, shaping me into the woman she believed I should be. But what she really did was mold me into someone who never believed she was enough. I rubbed my temples, shaking off the memory. I had spent too many years being told what my life should look like. Too many years being measured against impossible standards. Now Daniel had picked up that same torch using control, manipulation, and charm to make people believe he was the one with the answers. And my mother, as if blind, had stepped right into his narrative. But Ethan was not going to live the life I had lived. He was not going to spend his nights wondering if he'd ever be good enough for me. He was not going to grow up caught in the crossfire of adult battles, sacrificed for the sake of someone else's control. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, staring at the floor until my vision blurred. The thought settled into me slowly, like a stone sinking to the bottom of a river. This wasn't just about me winning custody anymore. This was about breaking a cycle that had shadowed my family for generations. I thought of the way Ethan ran to me after school, arms wide, his laughter spilling out without hesitation. He trusted me with his whole world, without questions, without doubts. That kind of trust was a sacred thing. It demanded that I be strong, even when the people who should have stood by me chose to walk away. A clock ticked on the dresser, marking each second as though it were reminding me how little time I had left to wallow. Tomorrow would come, and with it the weight of judgment. But tonight, in this small, quiet space, I had the clarity I needed. I lifted my head. I wiped the dampness from my cheeks, and whispered into the stillness. You won't go through what I did, Ethan. Not ever. I promise you. Hey, how's? The room was silent. But something inside me shifted. I felt the first flicker of resolve settling deeper than grief, stronger than fear. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was choosing. And tomorrow, that choice would carry me into the light of a courtroom where truth would finally have its turn. The next morning, I sat across from Morgan Hayes in his office. His desk was stacked with neatly organized files, but his hands betrayed the unease he tried so hard to hide. He tapped a pen against the legal pad in front of him. His brow furrowed in that way I'd come to recognize part calculation, part worry. We've built a strong case, he said finally, leaning back in his chair. The financial records, the emails, it's all compelling. But Clara. He paused, searching my eyes. We're still missing one decisive blow, something the judge can't brush aside, something that cuts through Daniel's performance. It not Jenks, take it not may bro. For a moment I let his words hang between us. I could feel the weight of them. Heavy but not suffocating. Not anymore. Last night's promise to Ethan still pulsed inside me, steady as a heartbeat. I folded my hands on my lap, met his gaze, and said calmly, I have a witness. Someone no one would dare question. With they are in state, now the self-arning. Morgan blinked, his pen stilling mid-tap. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk, as if he hadn't heard me correctly. A witness? Yes. I didn't flinch, didn't elaborate. I wanted him to feel the certainty in my voice more than the details of my plan. Their testimony will make everything Daniels said unravel. And is Estelle? His jaw tightened, a dozen questions flickering behind his eyes. For once, though, he didn't ask them. He just studied me, as though he was seeing me for the first time, not as a client clinging to scraps of hope, but as a woman who had finally chosen to fight. You're holding back, he said softly. I allowed myself a small smile, though it didn't reach my eyes. I'm holding steady. There's a difference. Thank you for watching. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence that settles when both people understand something unspoken. Morgan nodded slowly, almost respectfully, and set his pen down. All right, he said. If you say you have this covered, I'll trust you. But understand, tomorrow, everything will move quickly. Once you step into that courtroom, there's no turning back. I was no inderful, and it mind to see, and areas to caring that Ramasian. I know. My voice was steady. More than I expected it to be. That's exactly why I'm ready. I was no inderful, and it mind to see, and areas to caring that Ramasian. Morgan exhaled through his nose, a sound of both relief and resignation. He straightened the files in front of him, almost as if grounding himself in the work. But I noticed it. His shoulders eased. His eyes softened. For the first time since we'd started this fight, the doubt in him wasn't about me anymore. It was about whether Daniel knew what was coming. As I stood to leave, Morgan rose too, slipping his hands into his pockets. Whoever this witness is, Clara, I hope to God they're as unshakable as you sound right now. Aiden and Medi and Mestinged, in the rapst of Wad. I paused at the door, looking back at him, They are, I said simply. Then I left before he could press me further. Walking out into the sunlight, I felt the warmth on my face. Tomorrow loomed like a storm cloud on the horizon. But inside me, something had already cleared. I wasn't just hoping for justice anymore, I was preparing to deliver it. The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper. The kind of scent that carried the weight of 1,000 judgments before mine. As I stepped through the heavy double doors, I could feel the eyes on me. Whispers swirled, hushed and urgent, like the tide rushing in. I kept my chin level, my steps steady. This wasn't the place to show nerves. Daniel was already seated at his table, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit that made him look like he had walked straight out of a glossy magazine spread. He glanced up as I entered, and for a fleeting second, I saw the smirk tug at the corner of his mouth. It was the same smirk I had seen 100 times before, the one he wore when he was sure he had already won. The judge had not yet arrived. But the air in the room was already taut. It stretched thin like a wire ready to snap. Morgan leaned close and whispered, "Stay calm. Remember, everything we've prepared leads to this moment. In tainted ashen is a ball of Lake Caspian." I nodded, though my heart was beating so loudly it seemed to echo in my ears. Across the aisle, Daniel leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, eyes half-lidded in false relaxation. To anyone watching, he looked untouchable, as if the outcome had already been written in his favor. The bailiff's voice rang out, "All rise. In tainted ashen is a ball of Lake Caspian." Chairs scraped against the floor as everyone stood. The judge entered, his robe flowing like a dark shadow, his expression unreadable. He took his seat, and the gavel struck once, sharp and commanding. The sound reverberated through me, settling deep in my chest. The trial had officially begun. As the attorneys moved through opening formalities, I sat silent, my hands clasped tightly together on the table. Daniel's lawyer spoke first, his tone smooth and rehearsed, painting Daniel as a man of integrity, a devoted partner wronged by baseless accusations. The words floated through the air like perfume, pleasant on the surface, but suffocating if you inhaled too deeply. I didn't look at him. Instead, I let my eyes rest briefly on the rows of faces filling the gallery. Some were strangers drawn by curiosity. Others I recognized, colleagues, neighbors, people who thought they knew the truth of who Daniel and I were. They watched intently, leaning forward, caught in the same suspense I felt thrumming beneath my skin. When Morgan rose to speak, the shift in tone was palpable. His voice was firm, measured, every word anchored in resolve. He laid out our case with clarity, each point a stone carefully placed in the foundation of what was to come. Still, I knew that beneath the surface, the real battle hadn't even begun. I risked one more glance at Daniel. He wore that same confident smile, as though none of this troubled him in the slightest. His eyes met mine across the courtroom, and for a second, it felt as if he was daring me to try. The gavel struck again, calling the room to order as the proceedings moved forward. A hush settled over the space, heavy and suffocating. Every breath, every heartbeat, felt amplified in the silence. I reminded myself of the promise I had made to Ethan, of the long nights replaying every choice that had brought me here. This was no longer about fear. It was about resolve. The world might not yet know what I carried, but soon it would. And as the tension thickened, I sat straighter, ready. Tomorrow belonged to Daniel, or so he thought. But today was the beginning of the end. The courtroom had settled into that strange rhythm of testimony and cross-examination. A rhythm that could almost lull you if not for the stakes pressing against your ribs. I had sat quietly, letting the minutes pass, waiting for the exact moment I knew had to come. Daniel's team had strutted through their points with smug certainty, and I could feel the spectators beginning to lean in his direction, their eyes flicking toward me with doubt. When the judge called for our next move, Morgan turned to me with the briefest of nods. It was my signal. My chance to finally shift the ground beneath Daniel's polished shoes. I stood. I smoothed my skirt and felt the eyes of the entire courtroom follow me as I spoke. Your Honor, I said. My voice steady though, my pulse raced. The plaintiff requests permission to call a very special witness. En masse God tune messes. Daniel's head tilted ever so slightly. The smirk threatening to return to his face, he leaned toward his lawyer, whispering something that made the man's lips curl with amusement. To them. I was bluffing, stretching out the inevitable, trying to grab attention before the hammer fell. The judge peered down at me. Brows knit together. A witness not previously disclosed? Yes, Your Honor, I replied, my gaze unwavering. A witness whose testimony is crucial, and whose presence here will clarify everything. Anyone. There was a murmur in the gallery, the sound of curiosity spreading like wildfire. The judge hesitated, then gave a slow nod. Very well. Call your witness. Anyone. I drew a breath, the moment heavier than any I had ever carried. My voice rang out, clear and deliberate. The defense calls Chief Judge Robert Whitman. Anyone. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened, and time seemed to stop. He entered with the kind of presence that commanded silence before a word was spoken. Chief Judge Robert Whitman was a man whose reputation stretched across states, a figure synonymous with integrity. His career a benchmark for fairness in the judicial system. He walked with slow, deliberate steps, his robe sweeping the floor, his expression calm but unyielding. The entire courtroom froze, even the shuffle of papers, the scratch of pens, all of it vanished. You could almost hear the collective intake of breath as recognition rippled through the crowd. Daniel's smirk faltered, his jaw tightened, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the edge of the table. He tried to mask it with a quick adjustment of his tie. But it was too late. I had seen it. And so had everyone else, the crack in his carefully constructed armor. Chief Judge Whitman approached the stand with measured dignity. The bailiff, looking more nervous than I'd ever seen him, swore him in. The judge presiding over our case adjusted his glasses, visibly startled, as though unsure how to balance respect for the man, now taking the witness chair with the gravity of the trial at hand. The gallery was electric, a mixture of awe and disbelief. Whispers fluttered like restless wings. Why is he here? What does this mean? I remained standing, my hands clasped in front of me, though inside my chest, my heart beat with the force of a drumline. This was the card I had held close. The one no one, especially Daniel, had ever seen coming. Daniel's eyes darted between me and Whitman, his composure unraveling with each passing second. He tried to cross his legs, then uncrossed them, shifted in his seat, cleared his throat. None of it helped. The confidence that had once oozed from him now seemed thin, brittle, like a mask about to shatter. The judge gave a cautious nod toward me. Proceed. In his reser is a mother may christing. And as Chief Judge Robert Whitman folded his hands on the stand, the silence deepened, stretching taut and breathless. Every person in that room leaned forward, waiting to hear the first words that would either confirm or unravel everything we thought we knew. For the first time since the trial began, it wasn't Daniel who controlled the stage. It was me. Chief Judge Whitman adjusted the microphone, his steady voice filling the chamber. My name is Robert Whitman, Chief Judge of the Federal Court of Appeals. I have known Clara Reynolds for years, both professionally and personally. And what this court needs to understand today is the truth about who she really is. I would have to second. I sat motionless, though my stomach turned with equal parts fear and relief. This was the moment I had dreaded and prayed for all at once. Whitman's gaze swept across the room, landing briefly on Daniel, who was squirming now, his earlier arrogance bleeding away. Clara is not simply a mother fighting for her son, Whitman continued. She is, in fact, A federal judge, one of the youngest ever appointed in this state. Her reputation is impeccable. Her judgments fair. Her service unquestioned. In condition is, in Duner 1. I have not mince cleared of Naunair and the cursed. The gallery erupted in shocked whispers. Gasps echoed off the walls. The presiding judge rapped his gavel for silence. But even he couldn't hide the flicker of astonishment on his face. Daniel's attorney jumped to his feet. Objection, none of this was disclosed in discovery. Whitman cut him off. His tone unshakable. It wasn't disclosed because Clara deliberately concealed her position. Not for advantage, but for protection. She feared rightly that revealing her role as a federal judge would invite a circus of media attention. That her son, Ethan, would be dragged through headlines. Reduced to fodder for public debate. She wanted him shielded from that. A right is their vermistive minute candid. All eyes turned to me. For a second, my throat tightened. I had spent so long hiding that part of myself. Playing small so Ethan could feel safe. And now, the truth stood naked in the middle of this room. I rose to my feet. My voice quieter than Whitman's but just as steady. Everything I did, every secret I kept, was for Ethan. I didn't want his childhood turned into a headline. I didn't want him growing up in the shadow of my robe. I just wanted to be his mother. The stand. And the judge presiding looked shaken, caught between his duty and the weight of the testimony before him. The gallery leaned forward as if drawn by a magnet. Whitman cleared his throat and drew out a folder. Beyond her character. I bring to this court documented evidence, financial records, verified by independent auditors, demonstrating that Daniel and Helen not only misrepresented their finances, but knowingly perjured themselves in earlier filings. These documents confirm that Clara has been truthful in every affidavit she's submitted. Daniel, on the other hand, has not. It is a mals that pick. Daniel slammed his hand on the table. That's a lie. His voice cracked. His face flushed red. But no one believed him. Not anymore. His panic was too transparent. His words too hollow. The presiding judge requested the documents. Flipping through them slowly. Each page he turned seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. His face hardened as the truth settled in. And Daniel's once bright confidence dimmed into something close to despair. Whitman leaned back slightly. His testimony complete. Clara Reynolds is a judge who has spent her career upholding the truth. Today, I stand here to affirm that she is also a mother who deserves to raise her son without interference, deceit, or manipulation. Silence fell. It wasn't the silence of confusion or fear, but the heavy quiet that comes when justice finally begins to shine through the cracks. I felt tears sting the back of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not yet. Not here. The spectators shifted in their seats, many nodding, as if they, too, had been waiting for this moment. The tide had turned, and everyone could feel it. Daniel slumped back, his fists clenched, his jaw tight, his face pale. Helen sat beside him, unable to meet anyone's eyes, her hands trembling as she twisted a tissue into shreds. For the first time since this ordeal began, I breathed deeply. The truth was out, and with Whitman's words, I knew Daniel's grip on this case had finally, irrevocably, slipped away. The gavel came down hard, echoing like thunder in the chamber. The presiding judge's voice carried the kind of weight that silenced every cough, every shuffle of papers, every whisper in the gallery. This court finds in favor of Clara Reynolds. Full custody of Ethan Reynolds is hereby granted to his mother, effective immediately. I am stole me. All of the spaces. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I had rehearsed this outcome 100 times in my mind. Yet, hearing the words spoken aloud felt surreal. Almost like a dream I was afraid to wake from. The judge wasn't finished. He looked sternly over at Daniel and Helen, his expression cutting through the room like a blade. Furthermore, in light of the evidence presented, regarding false statements under oath and misrepresentation of financial records. This court is referring Mr. Daniel Reynolds and Mrs. Helen Matthews to the district attorney's office for further review and possible prosecution. A ripple of shock swept through the room. I heard someone in the gallery let out a low whistle before quickly falling silent. Daniel sat frozen, his jaw slack, his once polished image collapsing in on itself. It was as if he'd been hollowed out in a single strike. I watched his eyes dart toward me, wide and frantic. But there was no trace of the confident man who had strutted into court just days earlier. He looked lost, stripped of every illusion of control. Beside him, Helen lowered her head. Her shoulders curled inward. Her tissue, now nothing more than damp shreds, slipped from her hand onto the floor. She didn't bother to pick it up. Shame weighed on her like a stone, pressing her into the chair. I sat very still, my palms pressed against the table, steadying myself. Relief coursed through me. But it wasn't triumphant. It wasn't victory for victory's sake. It was the kind of relief that comes from surviving a storm, from knowing the house still stands, even if the windows are shattered. The judge's gavel struck one last time. Court is adjourned. Inanimate. The gallery erupted in murmurs. But I barely heard them. My eyes closed. And for the first time in months, I felt the weight lift. Ethan was mine, safe, protected. Finally, beyond Daniel's reach, I whispered to myself, almost like a prayer. It's over. Way. The air felt different that afternoon. Softer somehow. As if even the wind had decided to carry only peace. Ethan's small hand was warm in mine as we strolled through the park. The world around us buzzed with the easy rhythm of life, dogs chasing tennis balls, children laughing on the swings, the distant hum of an ice cream cart. It was so ordinary, so beautifully ordinary, that I felt my chest tighten with gratitude. Ethan tugged at my hand, his eyes wide with the unfiltered wonder only a child can hold. "Mom," he said, his voice earnest. "You're like a superhero." And sure, I stopped, looking down at him, startled by the weight of his words. His face was lit with that unshakable belief children carry when they see their parent as larger than life. I knelt so we were eye to eye, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "I'm no superhero, sweetheart," I told him softly, pulling him into my arms. "I just helped justice win, that's all." "See, as burst too." But he shook his head, wrapping his arms tight around my neck. "That's what superheroes do. They protect people. You protected me." The as Creason is a port. The simplicity of his truth pierced me deeper than any verdict could. I held him tighter, breathing in the scent of grass and sunshine, letting the moment etch itself into my soul. For so long, our lives had been defined by battles, by courtrooms and accusations. Now, here, in the quiet of the park, it felt like we were finally stepping into something new, something untouched by fear. We walked on, his little legs skipping every few steps. I watched him chase after a butterfly, laughing as it darted just out of reach. That laugh, the pure, ringing sound of it, was the only proof I needed that I had done the right thing. As the sun dipped lower, casting a golden glow across the lawn, Ethan came running back to me. He grabbed my hand again, grinning up at me with all the trust in the world. I smiled back, and for the first time in what felt like forever, it wasn't forced. It was peace. I realized then that this wasn't the end of our story. It was the beginning.